All right, let's talk about something that's really important but can be, pretty confusing. Child psychiatry. The big question is always, how do you tell the difference between a kid just going through a tough phase and a genuine disorder? Well, today we're going to build a clear framework for understanding it all using a short textbook of psychiatry as our guide to break down the major conditions that can affect children and adolescents.
So here's our roadmap for this journey. We're going to start with the big picture. How do experts even organize these conditions? From there, we'll zoom in on specific disorders, the ones that affect one area versus the ones that impact a child's entire world. Then we'll tackle some of the big ones you've probably heard of, like ADHD and conduct disorders, before wrapping up with tics. Sound good? Let's dive right in.
Okay, first things first, we have to build a foundation. Before we can even begin to talk about any single condition, we really need to get a handle on how the experts think about them. And that all starts with one simple idea: classification.
This really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Every single kid has bad days, they have tough weeks, they have challenging phases. So where is the line? Where do you draw the line between just, normal growing pains and an actual clinical disorder? The key is all about looking for patterns. Patterns that consistently get in the way of a child's ability to learn, to grow, and just to be a kid.
And that is exactly why classification is so important. It gives doctors, therapists, teachers, everyone a shared language to talk about what's going on. Think of it like a universal dictionary for these conditions. It helps make sure everybody is on the same page, which, let's be honest, is the most critical first step to getting a child the right support.
All right, let's get into our first major category. These are called specific developmental disorders, and that name pretty much tells you everything you need to know about how they work. The textbook defines these by just how focused they are. We're not talking about a delay across the board here. Instead, it's a significant roadblock in one very particular area, while other parts of a child's development are often chugging along just fine.
Yeah, this is a great way to think about it. If you imagine a child's brain as like a powerful computer, a specific developmental disorder is kind of like having a bug in a single piece of software. Maybe the word processor keeps crashing, but the internet browser, the games, and the whole operating system, they all work perfectly.
And you've probably heard of some of these before. Dyslexia is the classic example. The specific challenge is with reading. But you also have dyscalculia, which affects math skills, dyslalia, which impacts speech sounds, and dyspraxia, which deals with motor coordination. You see the pattern, right? Each one is laser-focused on one particular ability.
Now let's completely flip that idea on its head and look at our next category: pervasive developmental disorders. The word pervasive gives it away. These conditions have a much broader impact on a child's life.
So if we go back to our computer analogy, this isn't a glitch in one program anymore. This is more like a fundamental issue with the entire operating system. It affects how everything works together, how the child interacts with the world, how they communicate, and how they behave.
The textbook points to infantile autism as the primary example here. At its very core, it's about a profound challenge in making emotional connections, that affective contact with other people. And the signs almost always show up very early in life. So autism is often understood through what's called a triad of challenges. The first piece is social interaction. And this isn't about being shy. It's a fundamental difficulty in those back-and-forth social connections. It might look like a baby who doesn't smile back at their parents, or a child who seems to be in their own world, preferring to play alone.
The second part of that triad is all about communication. For some children, speech might be very delayed or may not develop at all. For others, the speech they have might sound different. They might repeat phrases they've heard on TV, that's called echolalia, or they might mix up pronouns, saying you when they really mean I. And the third and final piece of the triad involves a pattern of restricted and repetitive behaviors. This can mean things like hand flicking or rocking back and forth. It can also mean a really strong need for sameness and routine, where even a small change can be incredibly upsetting.
The textbook also touches on a couple of related conditions. One is Asperger's syndrome, which involves many of the same social challenges as autism, but without the early delays in language. It's worth pointing out that today, this is usually diagnosed under the bigger umbrella of autism spectrum disorder. And then there's Rett syndrome, which is a very different genetic disorder seen only in girls, where they actually lose skills they once had after a period of typical development.
Okay, let's shift gears now. We're going to move on to two of the most well-known and talked about childhood disorders, the ones that revolve around attention, behavior, and self-control.
Now, the textbook uses the term hyperkinetic disorder, but I guarantee you know it by its more common name, ADHD. It's really defined by a persistent pattern of three core things: a major difficulty paying attention, hyperactivity or restlessness, and impulsivity. And we're not just talking about a kid with a lot of energy here. This is a pattern that truly interferes with their life at school, at home, and with friends.
Next up is conduct disorder. And it is so important to understand this is miles away from just typical childhood mischief. The book defines it as a serious and persistent pattern of behavior where a child consistently violates major rules and, more importantly, the basic rights of other people. We're talking about things like aggression, theft, or deliberate destruction of property.
This slide does a brilliant job of clearing up the difference between the two. While it's possible for a child to have both, their root causes are different. ADHD, at its heart, is a problem of self-regulation, of managing focus, energy, and impulses. Conduct disorder, on the other hand, is really a problem of aggression and defiance, of intentionally breaking rules and hurting others.
All right, for our final section, we're going to explore a group of conditions that are mainly characterized by involuntary actions, along with some other specific challenges that often start in childhood. So, first off, what even is a tic? The textbook gives a really precise definition. It's an abnormal, involuntary movement or sound. And that word involuntary is everything. These are not things a child is choosing to do. They're more like a neurological hiccup.
The most well-known tic disorder is, of course, Tourette's disorder. To get this diagnosis, a person has to have both motor tics, like eye blinking or shoulder shrugging, and at least one vocal tic, like coughing or sniffing, for more than a year. And as you can see, tics can range from very simple to extremely complex. This includes coprolalia, which is the involuntary swearing people often associate with Tourette's, though interestingly, it's actually not nearly as common as movies make it out to be.
And finally, the textbook discusses elimination disorders. This covers conditions like enuresis, which is repeated urination in bed or clothes, and encopresis, which involves stooling in inappropriate places. The key for both is that these accidents are still happening regularly well past the age when a child is expected to be toilet trained, and importantly, there's no underlying physical medical cause.
So, after going through all of this, what's the big takeaway? Well, these clinical frameworks we've been talking about, they aren't just cold, sterile labels. They're tools. They're tools for understanding. They help us see that a behavior isn't just a choice, but a symptom of a real underlying challenge. And that understanding, that is always, always the first and most powerful step toward empathy, toward meaningful support, and toward making a real difference for these kids and their families.